Greetings and salutations. Thank you for clicking on this video. Today we're going to talk about file management. This is video number 4 in our series called Beginner's Guide to the Desktop, and we're going to talk about file managers and how you can use them to manage the files that are on your computer. First thing that we're going to have to do here is use our file manager to open up a graphic file, which I'm going to use to illustrate a concept. And that is the file system that exists on your computer. We're looking at the old Unix file system. The Linux file system is very similar. The Windows file system also owes its origin to the Unix file system. And so, therefore, these are universal concepts. First of all, we need to ask a question. What is a file? You'd be surprised how many people don't know what that is. A file is a blob of data that represents something, and we put that in a container. And so you can have a file that would be your resume, that would be a document file. You could have a file that could be your favorite song, that would be an audio file. We could put a movie, a picture. There are files that contain code that the computer uses to do things. We call those programs. Those are binary or executable files. And then there are log files, configuration files. It goes on and on and on. As a matter of fact, when you sit down in front of a computer, even if it's brand new and you haven't generated any data at all, you haven't put a picture in there or downloaded anything from the internet, there's already hundreds of thousands of files on it. So it really helps to know how those files are stored and the organization that's used to put them in some sort of logical order so that you can find them again later. If you took computer science class, boy, they spent a lot of time talking about files and file organization. You can always tell somebody who doesn't know a whole lot about computers because they have no clue where things go. It's like, oh, I saved that, but I don't know where it went, that sort of thing, you know. So hopefully, if you're one of those folks and you're watching this video, this will be a big help to you. Okay, so what is this thing that we're looking at? Well, like I said, it's a representation of the Unix file system. This is known as a tree. And I realize it doesn't look much like a tree, but if you think of a tree being upside down, it makes perfect sense. So what is this? Well, this is a virtual filing cabinet. When computers were being developed and they started generating data that had to be stored somewhere, the designers thought in terms of like a filing cabinet in an office. And if you take a computer science class, this is exactly how they teach you this, is they compare it to a filing cabinet. So imagine that your filing cabinet is some sort of mass storage device, a hard drive, an SSD, a USB stick, going back to the earlier days of computers, it could be a tape drive or a floppy disk, anything. It doesn't make any difference. It's just some place that you store data. And just like a filing cabinet, we stick files in there. And it becomes very convenient to take files and group them together and then put them in folders. Now, the term directory and folder is interchangeable because a directory is just a list of files. So let's say, for instance, that you took all your tax information and you put it all together and you took a big manila folder and you put it in there, and then you would write on the front of the manila folder tax info, and then below that list everything that was in there. That's a directory of everything that is contained in that folder. So the term folder and directory are interchangeable, mainly because of the fact that when GUI interfaces came along, directories were represented by a little icon that looked like a folder. So there you go. So we have files, we have folders, we can put more folders in folders with more files, and on it goes. So what we're looking at here is a representation of a bunch of folders or directories and what you might find in them. We start at the root of the file system, not to be confused with the root user on a Linux or Unix system. The root user is the one person who has permission to change everything on the system. In a file system, we're just talking about the start of the file system, and that is represented by a slash. And this is also known as the boot folder, even though Linux systems have a folder in them called boot. This would be the boot file system because it has to start from somewhere, and in the slash is usually where the operating system itself is installed. In Windows, this is represented by a backslash. And that goes way back to PCM, which is what DOS was based on. They were just a little different. They did it a little backwards. And also in Windows, you'll see a drive letter associated with this. So you'll have like C colon backslash. That's called a C prompt. In the Unix world, we don't really care about the device that things are stored on because we can always stick more devices into the file system. So you're not going to see drive letters. Devices are represented in other ways within the file system, which we will talk about shortly here. So we have our root folder, which contains a bunch of other directories, directory and folder being interchangeable. And the first one we see is bin, and that's short for binary, and that is where executable programs live. And then we have the dev folder. Everything on a Unix or Linux system is represented as a file, even your hard drive, the microphone that I'm using. As far as the computer is concerned, that's just a file. And data is sent back and forth to these devices as virtual files that run in the dev directory. And then we have etc. Etc. is, or etc. or etc. is where configuration files are stored for the system and for different programs. We have the home directory, which is probably one of the most important ones to know about because that is where your account information is stored. All of your personal data and settings end up there. Then we have temp, which is short for temporary files, and that is where temporary files that programs generate as they do their tasks are put, and sometimes the program itself deletes them, and then other times they're left until the system is restarted and the temporary directory is cleaned out. And then finally we have USR, which is short for Unix System Resources or Universal System Resources. Depends on who you ask. And that is a directory that contains information and programs and other things that every user on the system needs access to. So your desktop, for instance, puts its icon theme files in there and things like that. Not represented here are a couple of directories that you kind of need to know about. There's one called var, which is short for variable. That's where logs are kept. That's where your printer spool is. Some email programs throw things in there. It's kind of like a variable directory. And so a lot of your system logs and things like that you will find in var. So that is the basics of the file system. Now what's really groovy about this system here is that it's very scalable. What we're looking at here would be something that would be on like a desktop or a laptop computer. But this exact model can be used with a supercomputer that has hundreds of users and has all kinds of storage devices mounted to it. Because when we mount a storage device, it is mounted somewhere in the file system. So it can appear anywhere. You can take a hard drive, an external hard drive for instance, and plug it into your Linux system, and then you could mount it anywhere within your file system. So it doesn't matter how many you have. In Windows, it's always an A, B, and a C, and it always starts the file system over again, usually. In Windows, you can mount devices within the system, but it's not normally done. So in the Unix world, we don't really care about the device. We don't care where the data lives. We just care where it goes, which makes it super scalable. As a matter of fact, you could almost think of the internet as being one giant directory. I mean, one giant file system just like this, and each computer could be considered as a folder or a directory in there, and each server, and then you go get information. It all works on the same concept, believe it or not. So it's hugely scalable. It goes from the micro to the macro. Now that we've covered the basics, let's talk about the programs that you use to actually manage files on your desktop. Here I have a desktop with a bunch of file managers loaded, and these are all different programs. They look slightly different, but you notice something interesting here. They are all laid out pretty much the same way. That is because pretty much every file manager in every operating system everywhere is patterned after the one that we looked at in the introductory video to this series, where we were looking at the Windows 95-98 desktop. And the concept is really simple. Take the file system and make it look like a web page, and then you'll be able to navigate around. So what have we got here? We got Nemo, that one I recognize. Let's see, they don't really tell you what they are, so I'm going to open them up here. This is PCman FM, which is the file manager that you find in the LXDE desktop. And then we have another file manager here. Well, which one is this? Well, it's Thunar. This is the one that you find usually associated with XFCE. And then, well, we got another one here. Which one is this one? Well, this one is Kaha or Kaja, which is the one that comes with the Mate desktop environment. And then since the desktop that we're using to demonstrate this is KDE, the standard file manager for that is one called Dolphin. They all basically work in the same way. There is really not that much difference. What makes these programs different are the features that surround the basic file manager functions. In this video, we are going to be looking at Nemo. Nemo is a file manager that I really like, and it was developed by the folks at Linux Mint, and it comes with all of the Linux Mint distributions. But Nemo will happily run on pretty much any Linux distribution as long as you have all the plugins and everything installed for it to make it happen. So if you like Nemo and you want to install it, be my guest. Pretty much all of these file managers are available in the repos for any distribution. And not only that, there are kind of freelance file managers, more advanced file managers with more features like Midnight Commander and GNOME Commander and many, many more. So if you want to, you can take a look at all these different ones and you can figure out which one you want to use. But I just basically wanted to show you the selection of file managers is pretty amazing in Linux. Linux always presents lots of choices. So let's jump back over here, get rid of our graphic, and we're going to get into the Nemo file manager. And we're going to get to home. And you pretty much notice here that if I click on File System, that you are now seeing kind of what we were seeing in that chart, whereas this window itself represents the root directory. So we have a lot of the folders in here that are familiar from what we talked about earlier, plus many more, and then we have some other files that we see here. This is where our operating system lives. This is the root of the file system. Any sort of device that we wanted to hook up to the system, we can access through the file manager. And also we have lots of shortcuts over here that allow us to get to different things in the system. Different areas, different locations. These are bookmarks over here. So we have one for our home folder, which is my home folder since I'm logged in as me. And then we have things like documents, music, all that kind of stuff, which represent folders within the home folder. And then, we have other things here that we can get to. We have a trash can. So if we delete files, we can temporarily store them in trash. So if we want them, we can get them back. We're going to talk about how that works a little bit later on in this video. And this also gives us access to networks. So right now, I can click on my network area storage, and it opens up folders. And then you see in here, okay, I have one called storage. And if I open this, you're not going to see anything because that's actually not hooked up right now. But if I did click on this, then it would open up. Well, let's see. Maybe it will anyway. Okay, yeah, I don't actually have a hard drive in here, so there's nothing in here. But now you see this little folder appears on my desktop that tells me that I'm now hooked up to my network area storage device. You can also use this to hook up to other devices on your system. So I can use this to get into different servers. And in Nemo, you can do that here. We have an option to connect to server. We could connect to SSH, which is usually the way I use this, but we can use FTPs and public FTPs, all kinds of servers. So any network device that allows you to share files with something else, you can use your file manager to get into, which is a pretty cool thing to know about file managers. Before there were GUI applications to manage your files, you would have had to have done that from some sort of command line somewhere. So in this part of the video, what I want to demonstrate is some of the very basic things that we do with files and folders. And I'm going to do them in both ways. I'm going to do them with commands, and then I'm also going to do them over here in the file manager so that you can see how this works here. First of all, before we get into that, I just want to point out that Your desktop environment, when it installs, usually spins up some folders that are kind of like to help you figure out where to put things. So you have a document folder. Well, obviously that's where you'd put things like, your resume and your text files and whatever you were working on. And then you have downloads, and then you have pictures, and you have videos. And there are some in here that you might not know exactly what they're for. There's one here called public, which you can share on a network. You could set this up to share, and then any file you put in there, that's for other people to see on the network. So if you had like a network share that was up all the time, like an NFS share, that would be a good folder to mount your NFS share in, and then you could see what was going on in there. Anything that you would put in there would be shared on the network. So that's what that one's about. Then we have one called templates that's generated, and that would be like if you have files that you're using with your word processor that you always start out with. You might throw them in there. And of course, videos is self-explanatory. And mine has some extras. I have a bunch of audio files that have all kinds of stuff. I've got an extra music library here that's structured differently from the one in music. Then I have VirtualBox VMs, and so that's where the virtual machines live on my system. And then over here we have the same representation in the terminal, and I got to that by typing list storage, which is ls. So I just did it again. So what I want to do here is I'm going to kind of goof around in the terminal, and then you're going to see the files appear over there. We're going to alternate back and forth between ways of doing things just so that you can see how it works. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to create a place for us to work in. I'm going to use the file manager to do that. I'm going to choose to create a new folder. You see that's highlighted there, so we can give it a name. And we're just going to call this one junk. Okay? We're going to create a junk folder, and now you see that that's appeared. So let's see if it showed up. Well, we know it showed up, but here it is. What if I wanted to do the same thing but do it from a terminal? Then I would use a command called make dir, and we would call that junk2. So let's create another folder. And as you can see, it popped up in the file manager. So let's navigate to one of these folders so we can play around in it. So I just double clicked on junk there to get into it. To do it here, cd junk. And if I list storage, there's nothing in there. It's because we haven't created a file. So you might want to start out by creating a file. Usually your programs create a file. You start writing a document, you record some video, something like that, and then you save it as a file somewhere in the file system. But you can just create files that are empty to start with. So I'm going to touch a file, and we're going to call it test, and I'm going to give it an extension txt. We'll talk more about extensions in just a few moments. Now you see I created the file and it showed up there. We need another file to play with here, so I'm going to do it this way. So I'm going to create a new document, and it asks me to give it a file name, so we're going to call this one test2.txt. And now we have created an extra file, and you can see if we go over here to the terminal, now that shows up. So essentially what this GUI does is gives you a way to do things where you're not having to type a command to make it do something. So let's talk about renaming files. This is something that's really important because especially like picture files that come out of a camera or something, they just have a number. You need to give them a name so you know what file it is, right? So let's talk about doing that. Well, we're going to use the move command, which has two functions. It can rename a file in place, or it can be used to actually move a file to another directory. In this case, I'm just going to rename, let's see, test.t, and I click tab to continue the typing. We're going to give this another name, and we'll just give it a name like, I don't know, junk.txt. So if you're watching here, the file now changed its name and it reorganized it. So that's what we're doing here when we move files back and forth. And what about getting rid of a file? Well, we use the rm command So I'm going to get rid of junk, autofill that there, and there we go. Now that file disappears. If you wanted to remove a directory, then what you would do is, let's say that we wanted to remove junk 2. So I'm going to move up a level here, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing graphically. And now we have, I'm going to list this, and now I'm going to come over here, and now we have a folder in here, junk 2. Let's get rid of junk 2, shall we? So that would be, get that capitalized or it won't work. All right, so if I do that, it should disappear. Yep, that worked. But here's the thing. That folder is now gone because when you're working in a terminal, there's no trash can. If I was working in the GUI over here, let's take our junk folder, and I want to delete it. There's several ways that I can do that. I can highlight it by clicking on it once, or however you highlight in the file manager, and then click the delete key, and it would just go away. It would go into the trash can. Or I can right-click it, and then we have an option here, move to trash or delete. Moving it to trash is going to stick it in the trash folder, which is a temporary storage place for files that we want to get out of the system. But if I choose to delete it, it's going to go away. So I got an option there. Okay, so what if I just drag it over here? Well, I'll just drag it to trash. If I open up trash, you see that's where it is. So it's actually not been deleted from the file system. It's just been moved to temporary place to hold it temporarily. And then if we want to get rid of it, we can always open up our trash folder and empty the trash. So those are some basic things. We've just created a file, we've renamed a file, we've done lots of stuff. Let's get it back because I want to show you how to rename a file. So we select the file. I'm going to restore the selected files. It puts it back. Go back to home. So let me show you how to rename a file from within the file manager itself. And these functions, like I said, are pretty basic. You can right-click. You can choose rename. And now it highlights and you type in the new name. And you'll notice that it highlighted it before the file extension. We haven't talked about file extensions yet, but it's very important to keep in mind when you're renaming files, don't change that file extension. So I don't know what to call this now because we have messed around with it 19 different ways to Sunday, so I'll just call it test. And so it changed the name of it. Another way to do that, highlight that, click F2, use the F2 key, done. And then we can get into a more sophisticated way of doing that, which is file properties, which is the next thing that we need to talk about. So if I come down here and click on properties, we get all the properties for this little file. It tells us the size. It tells us when it was created. It tells us all this wonderful stuff. We have file permissions here. We need to talk a little bit about that. But first I want to talk about file associations and what extensions are. So different programs on your computer generate different kinds of files. And we use kind of standard extensions so that the programs know what to open it with. So in this case, the computer is set up to open anything that has .txt on the end of it in a text editor. There is no text in this file. We can use a text editor to add text to it, though. I'll just put in something stupid like hi. And now, if we save the file, save, we have a file that has something in it. And every time we click on it, it will open in a text editor. You can reassociate this stuff. Let's go to properties. So for instance, if I go to open with here, and then I choose, I don't want to open it with that. I want to open it with LibreOffice. I just come down here and find LibreOffice. So there's LibreOffice Writer. I could associate it with that. That's how that works. So if you have a certain kind of file and you prefer a certain program to open it up, then that is how you would set that. It comes with some presets in the desktop usually. Sometimes you have to set those manually. But if you're using something like Cinnamon or Mate or whatever, it's got all those preset to whatever the default program is for doing that sort of thing. And most desktops also have a way to choose preferred applications to work with certain files. So let's look at that real quick. So in the Cinnamon desktop here, if I open up preferred applications, then I get this. Now we get the type of file. So, for instance, the web and mail are something slightly different, but let's see, I can choose my text editor here. I can choose music, that sort of thing. So that's a group of files that represent a certain kind of media. That's what extensions do. So when you're changing the name of files or you're creating files, you always want to try and think about the extension. Now, one of the groovy things about the Linux operating system is that it's been around for so long, and it's based on Unix, which was around much longer than that. Not based on Unix, but modeled after. That in the early days, before we had all these programs, you didn't need extensions. So unlike Windows, where in Windows you pretty much need an extension on anything. If it doesn't have an extension, the system won't know what to do with it. Linux, on the other hand, can deal with that. So I can show you that in sort of a graphic way. We're kind of done with this terminal here, because I just wanted to show you. I'm not going to get into all the terminal commands to do all that stuff. That's for another video. But I just wanted to show you what the file manager was doing. It's just executing these commands graphically. So the next thing that we need to talk about files is permissions. So I'm going to go back to properties. In Linux, each user, when they create a file or copy a file into their home folder, that file automatically belongs to them. And there are 3 levels of permissions. There is you, there is the group, and then there is the world. And you can change these permissions on any given file that you have to change the access that people who have access to your machine have. So if a file is owned by you, that means it's yours, and you can read and write that file usually. And then there's the group permission. Now that comes from systems that have thousands and thousands of people working on them, like if a big corporate system could have hundreds and thousands of users on it. So each project may have a group that is designated in the system, and then everybody who has anything to do with that project will have access to files within that group. On a desktop system, it creates a group for yourself, and you can add other users to your group if you want to. So you could say, well, anybody can read and write files in this group, but usually we don't fool around with that. Usually the one we fool around with is access to the world. So the universal or world permission here right now is read only, which means you can look at a file, but you can't change it, you can't delete it. So let's put that in action. I'm going to show you a bunch of things all at once here that bring together the concepts that we just talked about. So if I go to the file system shortcut there, and if I go to home, and then I go to Cindy, and then I take a look in her pictures, you're going to see that a lot of her pictures we can see them, and we can actually look at them. So here's a picture of her. Hi Cindy, how you doing? Nice to see you. And so here's a picture of her, and this picture, let's look at the permissions on that. Even though I'm not Cindy, it's going to show me the permissions because it's just going to show me what it is. So the world has access to this read-only. So I can look at it, but I can't delete it. So if I right-click over here, you look, that move to trash, delete, whatever. She has allowed me to see this, and so what I can do with it is make a copy of it. So if I just drag it out to the desktop here, and with an active desktop, it's kind of the desktop itself, it's acting a little bit like a file manager. You see now I have a copy of this file, and I can go to properties and permissions. Now it's owned by me, and I can read and write it. Anybody in my group can read and write it, and the world can see it. So let's go back to my home folder. Open up junk again so we have some place to work with. And just for fun, I'm going to rename this file. Tap F2 to rename. And I'm actually even going to get rid of the extension. And we're just going to call it Cindy. Did I do that right? Doesn't matter, but just want to make sure. People laugh at me when I make mistakes. Now I've just called the file Cindy. Notice that I still have a preview. That's because Linux, it can actually sometimes tell what a file is even if it doesn't have an extension. Don't try that in Windows. Windows gets confused real easy. It don't know what it is. And that's just because of the nature of the system, and because from the early days of Linux file systems, back when we were talking about Unix and early Linux, when you created a file, you didn't necessarily give it an extension. So there you go. Because the properties of the file itself determine what it is. So let's go back to permissions here on our file, and you can see here that we have a box that we could actually mark this as an executable file, and if we clicked on it, the system would try and run it like a program. Why is that there? That's because that we could use our little text file here that I just put hi in, and I could make this into a program that actually runs. I could write a script here that actually makes the computer do something if I wanted to. And I have another video that's up about scripting. I'm not going to get into how to do it right now. I'm just showing you guys that you can create a text file and make it executable. So in that case, if that was a script that I had written, I'd probably want to give it a name like test.sh, which is kind of short for a shell script, or give it no extension at all. And then I could come to Properties, Permissions, mark that as an executable program, and now the system will try and run it if I click on it. Run in terminal. Now it's not going to do it because there's no code in there. It's just going to say and quit doing it. It's not actually going to work, but that's how it would work if that were an executable program. Keeping files organized in folders is a really good way to make sure that you'll be able to know where to find things as your file system grows. So to do that, I can create a new folder here just by right-clicking and then choose Create New Folder, and then we'll give it a name. We'll call it Pics. And then I'm going to create another folder. Well, don't click on a file, dummy. Create new folder, and we'll just call it text. So now I can drag these files in here, and there they are. Now you'll notice that when I did that, they actually disappeared from within the file system that I was working on. So if I take this file and drag it out to the desktop, it moves the file. The file is getting moved. But what if I don't want to move a file? What if I want to copy it? Well, right-click. We can copy a file. Now basically this just throws a link up on the clipboard. We talked about the clipboard in the last video. And now come over here and I can paste. So now a copy of that file has appeared on my desktop, which is in the desktop folder. Even if your computer doesn't have an active desktop, you can still have a folder called desktop simply because some programs need to get in there to do things. So if you want to do things in batches, let's talk about that real quick. So I'm going to go back to my home folder, get into my junk folder. We're going to get into Pics. I'm going to come over here just for the fun of it, and I'm going to open up my Pictures folder in another. I'm going to go through here and select these, and we're going to copy them and move them into this folder. So how do you select multiple things? Well, the easiest way to do it is hold down the Control key and click once. Now I have selected a bunch of these pictures. I got pictures of George Carlin there. I got my background that I'm actually using right now. Just all kinds. I got all kinds of weird stuff in my Pictures folder. So now I have all those selected. So what I want to do with them is I want to copy them. I'm going to come back over here to this Pictures folder that we created, and I'm going to paste. Now the system will create copies of each one. So now if I want to select things that are here, if it's a really long list of files, I might want to do this in list form. So if I just wanted to select this one, how would I do it? Well, it's Control and Shift. Hold the Shift key down, hold Control. And now I just clicked the top file on the list, and then the next file down. So if you want to move a bunch of files around or get rid of them, that's how you would do it. You select all those files. If you are in this view, where you're looking at icons, you can just do this. I'm using the mouse, and I left click, drag, box opens up. Now I have selected everything within that box. Go back to the list view, and then we have just another view here that's available. How about searching for files on the system? I have a couple of tabs open here. So how about searching for files on the system? What if I couldn't find Cindy? Instead of having just 5 or 6 files in here, we had 10 or 20 of them. Well, that's pretty easy to do. We have a search tool built right into Nemo. I type in Cindy, it finds me that file, and then I can open that up. Now that becomes real useful when you're like going through folders that have hundreds of things in them. Let's talk a little bit about previews, because that's something that's important. Most modern file managers will give you a preview of what you're looking at. So in the case of pictures here, you notice I get a little thumbnail of the picture, and I can change the size on that, make them real big. So, you know, like when you're going through your pictures folder and you're looking for pictures, you can just look at thumbnails and you can just roll through. Make them real small, make them real big. But some desktops don't generate those kind of previews simply because of the fact that they don't have the plugins necessary. Some file managers need to have certain programs installed to be able to do that. And you just might not have it on your system or have the right one installed. And it will default to an icon. So for instance, if I go to my music folder, the system kind of knows that anything with an extension like FLAC, WAV, MP3, OGG, that's all music. That's all, those file associations are already in there. So if I open up my music folder, we see all of these. Now, if you are doing this from within a music player, then you're going to probably see thumbnails of the album cover. But that's something that's usually handled by the music player itself. So now that we have something with a lot of files in it, this is when the search becomes really useful. So let me go Beatles. And now it finds all my Beatles songs that are in here. And there's a whole lot. And I can scan through and look for them. And I can get more specific about that. So let's see. If I type in Beatles tax, there we go, Taxman right there. Basics of the file manager. All right. So I've shown you now that we can copy and paste files and move files around. And we've talked about deleting files and, of course, putting files in the trash. And if you put something in the trash, you can get it back. There are some shortcuts that you can use. So let's go back in here to our junk folder. I keep clicking myself out. I'm not a big fan of using tabs. Some people are. So I can open up packs, picks in a new tab. You know, if you use a tab system, that's fine. I just never have gotten used to it. I just always open up a new file manager and drag and drop back and forth. So we looked at deleting files. We looked at moving files. We've looked at renaming files. We've looked at that's pretty much all the basic stuff. Now, you might notice that if you're dragging a file from a different file system, that it doesn't actually move from that file system. It copies. So if you have 2 hard drives or something like that, and it's on a file system that's mounted to your file system, it's not automatically going to move that. It's going to just copy it. And the way to do that is to just go ahead and copy it and then delete it off the original file system. So let's go ahead and start getting rid of some of this stuff. And I'm going to say that, okay, let's just say that we want to get rid of these files, so I'm going to use that, just that right there. If I click the delete key, they just go poof, because they just jumped into the trash. And if I want to get rid of the whole folder, then I can do that. Now, here's where your terminal gets to be kind of useful, but it's also where it's dangerous. So I'm actually going to click out of the file manager for a moment. I'm going to open up a terminal, and I'm going to show you how I get rid of stuff. If I want to get rid of an entire directory, it's so easy to do. And this is where it gets dangerous, like I said. So we're going to list the storage. You see we have junk in there. We're going to get rid of junk because we're done playing around with that. And now I am going to just use RM. The R flag makes it recursive, which means that it's going to not only get rid of the directory, it's going to get rid of everything in the directory. Poof! It's gone. That's why it's kind of nice to have the trash can. So for instance, if I accidentally did that with my chart hits archives there, that would really, really suck. That would really, really be bad. Let's see, I think I've pretty much covered all the basics about working with files on your system. The main things to keep in mind as you're working with files are just to make sure that you give them logical names that you'll remember, and remember to use your folder system. When you start generating lots and lots of files, dividing them up into logical groups makes it a lot easier to figure out where they are. Some files are generated by programs, some files are generated by yourself. The file extensions tell you what the files are, and in some cases tell the system what programs to open up with the files. There are your files, which are contained in your home folder, and then there are files that are generally for the operating system itself. So that's what you see when you see file system. All of this is owned by the operating system and can only be manipulated by the root user. Whatever's in your home folder, that's yours, and you can do whatever you want with it. And whatever's in somebody else's home folder, well, that could be whatever they want you to do with it. So, for instance, just to prove the point before we wrap up, if I click on pictures, you'll notice that we have one in here called Carly. That's a picture of a dog, folks. But for some reason or other, I can't do anything with that. I can't look at it. I can't copy it. I can look at the permissions, and you will see that nobody has access to that file except Cindy. So use your file permissions for files that you don't want other people to get into on a Linux or Unix system if you have multiple users. So if you have kids using your system and you have files that contain things you don't want them to see, hide them and use the permission system to do so. Now, we did not get into file encryption. We have not gotten into all kinds of other things that go into managing files, like networks and all that stuff. This is just the very basics of how you can manipulate files on your computer. I hope this helped you out quite a bit, and I'd love to hear your comments and feedback and suggestions. I really don't know what to do next in this series, so why don't you guys give me a suggestion so I know what to do, and we'll look at some other basic aspect of using a desktop. So you guys tell me what to do next. Be sure and check out Freedom Penguin. That's got lots of great articles about Linux from contributors such as myself. Check out Easy Linux on the web. Check out Easy Linux on Facebook. And if you do, give it a like. Thanks for watching, gang. We'll do it again soon.